In 2026, some gemstones will quietly strengthen, others will stall, and a few that most people assume are safe may not perform the way they used to, because gemstone value does not move randomly. It shifts when three things change: supply pressure, buyer psychology, and global attention. Right now, all three are moving. One stone on this list is facing tightening high-grade supply. Another is gaining premium because of treatment transparency. And the number one stone, it isn't the rarest, it isn't the newest. But historically, when uncertainty rises, capital returns to it. This is not about speculation. This is about positioning. And by the end of this video, the ranking may challenge what most people think actually holds value. Before we begin, comment below. When evaluating a gemstone for long-term positioning, what matters most? Origin, rarity, certification, or liquidity? The answer to that question will determine which stones make sense for you in 2026. Let's begin. Ranked 10th, Peridot, the green that was never supposed to matter. For centuries, Peridot lived in the shadow of a more famous green. It was misidentified as emerald in royal treasuries. It was worn without prestige. It was admired without urgency. And perhaps that is exactly why 2026 may belong to it. Peridot is not rare in the theatrical way collectors imagine rarity. It does not rely on myth. It does not glow with dramatic origin stories of buried empires or lost mines in conflict zones. Its story is geological, almost stubbornly honest. Formed deep within the Earth's mantle and carried upward through volcanic activity, Peridot is one of the few gemstones born from fire and pressure in ways that are scientifically measurable rather than romantically exaggerated. What makes that matter in 2026? Because the gemstone market is shifting from mystique toward traceability. Peridot has something increasingly valuable in modern markets: relatively clean supply chains and clear geological origin. Major sources such as Arizona and Pakistan provide consistent production without the political volatility that complicates pricing for other stones. Stability does not generate headlines, but it does build quiet confidence, and confidence is often mispriced. Color is another overlooked factor. In an era where deep saturated greens are commanding premium pricing in emerald and Tsavorite, Peridot occupies a space that is both distinct and accessible. Its lime to olive tone is unmistakable. It does not pretend to be emerald anymore. It no longer needs to. Here is where the investment psychology becomes interesting. Historically, when premium categories rise sharply in price, the market searches for alternatives that still satisfy aesthetic demand. This replacement cycle is visible across multiple luxury sectors. In gemstones, that pattern often moves downward in price tiers before moving upward in recognition. Peridot currently sits in that early recognition phase. Auction data over the last decade shows modest but consistent appreciation in fine, well-cut stones above 5 carats with strong saturation and minimal inclusions. Not explosive growth, not speculative frenzy, steady correction. That steadiness may be its strength. Collectors age 40 and above tend to favor assets that do not behave dramatically. Volatility attracts attention. Predictability builds portfolios. Peridot, especially high-clarity stones from mountainous deposits in northern Pakistan, offers an entry point that feels rational rather than emotional. But here's the question worth considering. If Peridot were discovered today, with its volcanic origin, extraterrestrial presence in some meteorites, and its ancient use in Egyptian jewelry, would it still be priced where it is now? Or has the market simply underestimated it because it has always been available? There is a subtle difference between abundance and saturation. One refers to supply. The other refers to demand awareness. In 2026, awareness is expanding faster than supply narratives. Pay attention to this shift. Jewelers are no longer marketing Peridot as a substitute. It is increasingly presented as a distinct green with its own identity. That reframing matters. When perception changes, price often follows quietly, not dramatically, quietly. If this analysis resonates, consider sharing in the comments what quality matters most when evaluating a gemstone for long-term positioning: color depth, origin, certification, or historical narrative. The reasoning behind that choice often reveals more about market direction than the stone itself. Peridot may not dominate headlines, it may never command ruby-level prestige, but markets rarely reward only the loudest voices. Sometimes they reward the stone that waited patiently while attention was elsewhere. And in 2026, attention may be shifting. Ranked 9th. Spinel, the stone that stopped pretending. Few gemstones have endured a longer identity crisis than Spinel. For centuries, some of the most celebrated rubies in royal collections were not rubies at all. They were spinels, misunderstood, misclassified, and quietly worn by kings who never knew the difference. The famous Black Prince's ruby, mounted in the British imperial state crown, is not a ruby. It is Spinel. And that historical confusion shaped the market for hundreds of years. But markets eventually correct identity. And when identity corrects, value recalibrates. Spinel's rise is not based on hype. It is based on separation. Modern gemological testing eliminated ambiguity between ruby and Spinel decades ago, but recognition among collectors has accelerated only recently. In the past 10 years, auction houses began listing fine red and cobalt blue Spinels as headline pieces rather than secondary curiosities. This is where 2026 becomes relevant. Ruby pricing at the high end has reached levels that naturally compress demand into adjacent categories. When Burmese ruby crosses into extraordinary territory, collectors do not abandon red. They seek an alternative red that carries its own story. Spinel fits that psychological gap. However, this is not about substitution alone. Spinel offers something ruby does not: a broader palette. Neon pinks from Mahenge, cobalt blues from Vietnam, vivid oranges from Tanzania. Unlike many gemstones that require heat treatment to optimize color, fine Spinel is frequently untreated. In a market increasingly sensitive to treatment disclosure and natural integrity, untreated stones command growing respect. Supply dynamics further complicate the picture. Mahenge deposits in Tanzania that once produced electric pink spinels are not yielding material at earlier volumes. High-clarity stones above 3 carats with strong saturation have become increasingly selective purchases rather than casual acquisitions. Scarcity, when combined with recognition, creates inflection points. But Spinel's true advantage lies elsewhere. Liquidity psychology. Collectors aged 30 to 65 in the United States tend to value stones that are easily explainable. Spinel's story is simple and compelling. A royal stone misidentified for centuries. That narrative travels well. It does not require advanced gemology to appreciate. It connects history to modern correction. And markets reward narratives that are both true and memorable. Here is the subtle shift happening beneath the surface. Jewelers are no longer presenting Spinel as almost ruby. They are presenting it as royal Spinel. That language reframes hierarchy. When perception shifts from imitation to legitimacy, pricing structure follows gradually, not explosively, gradually. In 2026, Spinel's positioning appears strongest in 3 categories: untreated vivid red stones between 2 and 5 carats, Mahenge pink with strong fluorescence, cobalt blue Vietnamese material with documented origin. None of these categories are entry-level, but they remain below ruby's upper thresholds, creating a corridor of opportunity rather than speculation. Consider this carefully. If Spinel had never been confused with ruby, would its price tier be different today? Or has historical mislabeling suppressed its independent valuation longer than justified? That question deserves reflection in the comments, which matters more when assessing long-term positioning, historical prestige, color intensity, or treatment transparency. The reasoning behind that answer often reveals how the next cycle forms. Spinel is no longer pretending. It is no longer secondary. It is a stone reclaiming its name, and markets tend to reward clarity, especially after centuries of confusion. Ranked 8th, Tsavorite Garnet. The green that refuses to compromise. There is a particular shade of green that does not apologize. Not bluish, not yellowish, not softened for mass appeal. That green belongs to Tsavorite. Discovered in the late 1960s near Tsavo National Park, Tsavorite entered the gemstone world without royal mythology, without ancient crowns, without centuries of ceremonial symbolism. Its identity was built entirely on performance, color saturation, brilliance, and natural integrity. And in 2026, performance is quietly becoming more valuable than prestige. Unlike many emeralds, Tsavorite is typically untreated. No oiling rituals, no fracture concealment, no maintenance conversations. What is seen under magnification is often what exists. In a market increasingly sensitive to disclosure, that transparency carries weight. But Tsavorite's positioning is not built on ethics alone. It is built on tension. Emerald pricing has climbed steadily over the past decade, particularly for stones with Colombian origin and clean documentation. When a category rises, demand rarely disappears, it migrates. This migration creates corridors in adjacent stones, especially those offering comparable color intensity without identical structural vulnerability. Tsavorite occupies that corridor. Its refractive index gives it exceptional brilliance. Under controlled lighting, fine stones display a crisp, almost electric green that does not cloud easily. For collectors who appreciate saturated color but prefer durability and lower maintenance, Tsavorite offers a rational alternative. And rational alternatives often gain strength when luxury categories stretch too far. Supply, however, complicates the story. Tsavorite deposits are geographically limited, primarily concentrated in Kenya and Tanzania. Unlike emerald, which has multiple global sources, Tsavorite does not enjoy broad distribution. Fine material above 3 carats with vivid saturation and minimal inclusions is notably scarce. Production has never been abundant. It has been selective. Selective supply paired with expanding awareness creates quiet pressure. What makes 2026 particularly interesting is the shift in marketing language. Jewelers are increasingly presenting Tsavorite not as emerald alternative, but as collector-grade green garnet. That linguistic pivot matters. Identity defines category strength. When a gemstone stands on its own rather than leaning on comparison, price perception stabilizes. There is also a generational component at work. Collectors aged 35 to 60 are increasingly drawn to stones that feel distinct but not overstated. Tsavorite's intensity is refined rather than flamboyant. It signals knowledge rather than display. In social environments where subtle differentiation carries value, that characteristic becomes attractive. Consider the broader pattern. Markets reward authenticity when consumers grow fatigued by inflated narratives. Tsavorite has never relied on dramatic backstories. It relies on color, structure, and rarity within its size bracket. If emerald pricing continues upward pressure, and if untreated transparency remains desirable, Tsavorite may strengthen not because of hype, but because of comparative logic. That distinction is critical. Here is a question worth reflecting on. When evaluating a green gemstone for long-term positioning, does durability outweigh historical prestige? Or does origin carry more influence than treatment transparency? The reasoning behind that answer often signals where demand may flow next. Tsavorite does not shout for attention. It holds its ground. And in markets shaped by correction cycles, the stones that hold their ground often outlast the ones that dominate headlines. Ranked 7th. Aquamarine, the illusion of calm. At first glance, aquamarine appears almost too peaceful to matter. Its blue is not aggressive. Its brilliance does not compete for dominance. It does not rely on rarity shock or dramatic scarcity narratives. And yet, in uncertain markets, calm often becomes valuable. Aquamarine belongs to the beryl family, the same mineral group that produces emerald. But unlike emerald, aquamarine is structurally cleaner. Large crystals form with impressive clarity, often requiring little enhancement beyond routine heat treatment to refine tone. Transparency is its defining trait. Light passes through it with minimal obstruction, creating a crystalline depth that feels stable rather than volatile. That stability is precisely why 2026 deserves attention. In luxury markets, gemstones tend to behave in cycles. High volatility categories attract speculative energy, but after periods of price acceleration or correction, collectors frequently rotate into assets that demonstrate consistency. Aquamarine has historically behaved as a stabilizing category. Not explosive, not dramatic, predictable. Major sources such as Brazil, Madagascar, and Pakistan provide ongoing supply, but fine stones with deep, evenly saturated Santa Maria color remain selective. Larger stones, 10 carats and above, are more common in aquamarine than in many colored gemstones, but exceptional color concentration in larger sizes narrows quickly. This creates an interesting market dynamic. Availability exists, but top-tier quality does not scale proportionally. For collectors aged 40 and above, liquidity psychology matters. Aquamarine's recognizability works in its favor. Even non-specialists understand the appeal of a clean, oceanic blue. It is not a stone that requires explanation. It integrates easily into both fine jewelry and investment-grade loose stone portfolios. There is another factor quietly influencing demand: aesthetic fatigue. In cycles where intense neon hues dominate headlines, electric pinks, vivid greens, saturated reds, some buyers pivot toward restraint. Aquamarine's elegance is not subdued, it is disciplined. In boardrooms and formal settings, subtle sophistication often signals more confidence than spectacle. Consider this pattern. When economic sentiment becomes cautious, spending does not always contract. It becomes selective. Buyers favor pieces that feel enduring rather than expressive. Aquamarine's visual neutrality allows it to occupy that psychological space. Auction performance over the past decade shows steady appreciation in high-quality stones, with strong color saturation and documented origin. Not meteoric growth. Steady absorption, and steady absorption builds price floors. Here is where 2026 positioning becomes relevant. As emerald and sapphire markets fluctuate at higher tiers, Aquamarine offers entry into the respected beryl family without the volatility attached to emerald's treatment complexities or sapphire's origin premiums. It is a stone that behaves responsibly. The deeper question is this: in long-term gemstone positioning, is emotional intensity more valuable than structural clarity? Or does clarity, literal and figurative, create durability in uncertain cycles? The answer may reveal more about portfolio philosophy than about color preference. Aquamarine does not demand attention. It earns trust. And in mature markets, trust frequently outperforms excitement. Ranked 6th, Paraiba Tourmaline, the electric anomaly. Some gemstones whisper, some gemstones glow. Paraiba Tourmaline does neither. It electrifies. When copper was first identified as the chromophore responsible for its neon blue-green intensity in the late 1980s in Paraiba, the gemstone market experienced something rare: a true chromatic disruption. This was not a subtle variation of an existing category. It was a color that appeared almost artificial, a turquoise plasma that seemed lit from within. That internal luminosity redefined expectations for tourmaline entirely. But the defining factor for 2026 is not just color, it is compression. Original Brazilian production from the late 1980s and early 1990s was limited and is now largely depleted. Mozambique later emerged as an additional source, providing material with comparable copper content, but fine stones with intense saturation, minimal inclusions, and sizes above 2 carats remain extremely selective. This creates a rare market condition: strong global recognition paired with geological bottleneck. Unlike many colored stones that fluctuate in visibility, Paraiba Tourmaline has maintained consistent high-end auction presence. Its neon identity is unmistakable even to casual observers. That recognizability increases liquidity within the luxury tier. Buyers do not need extended education to understand its visual distinction. However, the category is not without complexity. Paraiba material frequently contains inclusions. Clean stones are uncommon. When clarity and color align in a single specimen, premiums expand sharply. This quality compression means the difference between commercial grade and collector grade can be exponential rather than incremental. In 2026, the most strategically positioned segment appears to be copper-bearing stones with certified laboratory confirmation, strong, evenly distributed neon saturation, sizes between 1.5 and 3 carats, where price-to-rarity balance stabilizes stones above 5 carats, enter a different economic bracket entirely, often competing with high-end ruby and sapphire pricing. There is also a psychological dimension to consider. Collectors in the 35 to 65 age range often divide into two categories: preservation-focused and distinction-focused. Paraiba Tourmaline satisfies the second group. It signals awareness of modern gemstone discovery. It represents late 20th century mineralogical evolution rather than ancient royal tradition. That distinction matters. Where ruby represents heritage, Paraiba represents disruption. Markets tend to reward disruptions, but only when supply cannot scale, and supply here is constrained by chemistry. Copper-bearing tourmaline does not occur casually. Its formation conditions are rare, and large deposits have not emerged to flood the market. Still, caution is warranted. The neon appeal attracts speculative energy. Over-exuberance can temporarily distort pricing. The more durable segment remains stones with documented origin, laboratory verification, and balanced proportions rather than extreme size alone. Here is the deeper question worth considering. When evaluating long-term gemstone positioning, does innovation carry more weight than tradition? Or does the market eventually gravitate back toward historical stability? Paraiba tourmaline occupies that intersection, a modern discovery that has already matured into a recognized luxury category. It is not a substitute stone. It is not an alternative green or blue. It is a chromatic anomaly. And anomalies, when supply is finite and recognition is global, tend to maintain relevance long after novelty fades. Ranked fifth, Tanzanite, the geography that cannot be repeated. Some gemstones are rare because they are difficult to extract. Some are rare because demand outpaces supply. Tanzanite is rare because of a map. Tanzanite exists in only one place on Earth, a narrow strip of land near the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Not a continent, not multiple mines across hemispheres. One geological pocket, roughly a few kilometers wide. When a gemstone supply is geographically terminal, its future becomes measurable. Discovered in 1967, Tanzanite is young compared to ruby or emerald. It does not carry medieval legends or ancient royal archives. Its narrative is modern, and modern stones behave differently in markets shaped by documentation and transparency. The most distinctive characteristic of Tanzanite is pleochroism, the ability to display different colors depending on viewing angle. Blue, violet, sometimes flashes of burgundy. Fine stones exhibit a saturated royal blue with violet undertones after controlled heat treatment, which is standard and widely accepted in the trade. That treatment transparency is important. Unlike stones where enhancement debates create uncertainty, Tanzanite's heat process is disclosed and normalized. Predictability reduces friction in transactions. But what truly defines 2026 positioning is grade compression. Over the past decade, miners have reported declining availability of high-grade rough. Larger crystals with deep saturation and minimal inclusions are not appearing in the volumes seen in earlier years. Commercial quality material remains accessible, but collector-grade stones above 5 carats with exceptional color have become increasingly selective acquisitions. Selective supply influences perception, and perception influences pricing behavior. Tanzanite also occupies a unique pricing tier. It offers entry into the fine gemstone category at levels below sapphire and ruby, while still providing dramatic visual presence. For buyers seeking saturation and size without entering six-figure territory, it remains compelling. However, it is not without volatility. Because Tanzanite is tied to a single region, regulatory shifts, mining policy changes, or geopolitical adjustments can influence availability more sharply than in multi-source stones. That concentration risk must be understood alongside scarcity appeal. Here is where psychology enters. Collectors between 35 and 60 often divide their acquisitions between heritage stones and finite discovery stones. Tanzanite represents the latter. It signals awareness of geological limitation rather than ancient prestige. It reflects an understanding that no secondary deposit will emerge elsewhere on the globe. If the mining corridor in Tanzania eventually exhausts economically viable production, there is no alternative geography to stabilize supply. That reality introduces a time horizon component. The deeper question becomes this: does single location scarcity create long-term resilience, or does global distribution provide stronger liquidity stability? The answer depends on investment philosophy. What cannot be denied is that Tanzanite's identity is anchored in geography. Its value narrative is not about ancient kings or auction dominance. It is about limitation, a defined boundary on a map, and markets often respond to boundaries. Not immediately, not dramatically, but progressively, as awareness grows that replacement is impossible. Tanzanite does not rely on myth. It relies on coordinates, and in the world of gemstones, coordinates can become destiny. Ranked fourth, Alexandrite, the color that refuses to stay still. There are gemstones admired for their brilliance. There are gemstones valued for their scarcity. And then there is Alexandrite, a stone defined by transformation. Discovered in the 19th century in Russia's Ural Mountains, Alexandrite earned immediate recognition because it appeared to defy physical law. Under daylight, it displays green to bluish-green tones. Under incandescent light, it shifts toward red or purplish-red. This dramatic color change is not surface illusion. It is a crystal structure response to different light spectra, a mineralogical phenomenon that remains one of the most fascinating in gemology. But fascination alone does not determine market position. Scarcity does. The original Russian deposits that produce the most celebrated examples are largely depleted. Later sources in Brazil, Sri Lanka, and parts of East Africa have provided additional supply, but stones with strong, clean, high-contrast color, change above 2 carats, are exceptionally rare. Fine Alexandrite does not scale with demand. That non-scalability shapes 2026 positioning. Unlike gemstones that fluctuate based on fashion cycles, Alexandrite operates in a narrow collector tier. It is not widely available in mainstream jewelry stores. It does not rely on trend-driven marketing. Its buyer base is informed, often technically educated, and typically older. Collectors who value phenomenon over ornamentation. There is also a crucial factor separating Alexandrite from many other stones: treatment rarity. Unlike sapphire or ruby, significant enhancement is not common in fine Alexandrite. The quality spectrum depends primarily on natural color change strength, clarity, and size. This simplifies evaluation at the high end. But the most important dimension is psychological. Alexandrite offers 2 identities in one stone. That duality carries symbolic weight: adaptability, resilience, change under pressure. In times of economic uncertainty, assets associated with transformation often carry subtle appeal. The gemstone itself becomes a metaphor for navigating shifting environments. Yet the market reality remains disciplined. Alexandrite pricing can be steep. Stones with vivid green to red shifts and clean transparency above 3 carats often enter 5- or 6-figure territory. This limits speculative behavior and concentrates ownership among experienced collectors rather than casual buyers. Limited audience, limited supply, high recognition within informed circles. That structure tends to create price stability rather than volatility. In auction environments, fine Alexandrite consistently commands attention because it satisfies both rarity and scientific intrigue. It is not simply beautiful, it is demonstrably rare in measurable ways, a function of chromium presence within a specific chrysoberyl lattice under precise geological conditions. And those conditions are uncommon. Here is the deeper consideration. When evaluating long-term gemstone positioning, does rarity alone sustain value, or does uniqueness of phenomenon create stronger insulation from market fatigue? Few gemstones can claim a phenomenon as unmistakable as Alexandrite's color shift. It is not subjective preference, it is observable physics. In 2026, that distinction matters. As consumers grow increasingly informed and laboratory certification becomes standard, stones with verifiable optical phenomena often gain credibility advantages. Alexandrite does not compete on volume. It does not compete on trend. It competes on impossibility, and markets have historically rewarded what cannot be replicated, especially when recognition is limited, but conviction among experts remains strong. Ranked third, emerald. When origin becomes authority, there are green stones. And then there is emerald. For centuries, emerald has symbolized power, renewal, and permanence. But in 2026, The strength of emerald does not rest on symbolism alone. It rests on origin, specifically stones traced to Colombia with full laboratory certification. Origin in gemstones functions much like appellation in fine wine. It narrows geography, defines expectation, and signals hierarchy. Colombian emeralds, particularly from the historic mining regions of Muzo and Chivor, are known for their saturated, slightly bluish-green hue and a distinct internal character often described as jardine. These inclusions are not flaws to be eliminated. They are structural fingerprints. In earlier decades, emerald evaluation focused primarily on color and size, but markets evolve. Today, certification and traceability increasingly influence pricing behavior. Independent gemological reports that confirm natural origin, treatment disclosure, and geographic sourcing have moved from optional documentation to expected infrastructure. That shift matters. Emerald is traditionally enhanced with oil to reduce surface-reaching fractures. This practice is widely accepted in the trade. However, the degree of treatment varies significantly. Stones with minimal enhancement, clearly disclosed and supported by respected laboratories, command notable premiums over heavily treated material. In 2026, the positioning of Colombian emeralds benefits from two converging forces. First, demand for documented transparency. Second, growing differentiation between origin categories. Zambian emeralds offer strong color and clarity, often at competitive pricing. Yet Colombian stones retain historical brand power. In global auction environments, high-quality Colombian emeralds consistently achieve strong results, particularly when accompanied by certification from recognized laboratories confirming both origin and treatment level. Scarcity dynamics also reinforce their position. While emerald mining continues, high-grade stones above 3 carats with rich saturation and balanced clarity are not abundant. Unlike aquamarine or some varieties of tourmaline, emerald does not routinely produce large, clean crystals. The combination of vivid color, manageable inclusions, and minimal enhancement narrows rapidly at higher sizes. This compression shapes collector psychology. Buyers between 40 and 65 often gravitate toward assets that combine heritage with documentation. Colombian emerald satisfies both. It carries centuries of cultural recognition while meeting modern expectations of transparency. There is another subtle factor influencing perception: emerald's resilience in storytelling. Unlike newer discoveries that rely on novelty, emerald's narrative is anchored in continuity. Ancient civilizations, royal regalia, and long-standing global trade routes. That continuity supports long-term relevance even as market conditions fluctuate. Yet caution remains essential. Not all emeralds benefit equally from rising demand. The most strategically positioned segment includes stones with confirmed Colombian origin, clear disclosure of minor or moderate oil only, strong, evenly distributed color saturation, sizes where clarity and color remain balanced rather than compromised. The broader question becomes philosophical. Does historical prestige provide greater long-term insulation than emerging rarity? Or does documented transparency now outweigh romantic legacy? In modern markets, the answer often lies at the intersection of both. Colombian emerald does not rely solely on scarcity. It relies on authority, the authority of origin, documentation, and continuity. An authority, when supported by verification rather than assumption, tends to endure across cycles. Ranked second, Sapphire, unheated fine origin. When integrity becomes premium. Blue has always carried authority, not the dramatic authority of red, not the theatrical authority of neon, but the quiet authority of permanence. At the center of that permanence stands sapphire, specifically unheated stones from fine origins. Sapphire is not rare in the broad sense. It is mined in multiple regions around the world. It appears in jewelry at nearly every price tier. It is familiar, recognizable, stable, but familiarity hides hierarchy. The difference between commercial sapphire and fine unheated sapphire is not subtle. It is structural. Heat treatment is common in the sapphire trade and widely accepted to improve color and clarity. However, stones that achieve vivid saturation and balanced tone without thermal enhancement occupy a different category entirely. Unheated stones are geological statements. They represent conditions that align perfectly without human intervention. And in 2026, that natural integrity carries increasing weight. Origin compounds the effect. Sapphires from Sri Lanka, historically known as Ceylon, are prized for their bright, open blues with high transparency. Stones from Myanmar can exhibit deeper royal tones with rich body color. Kashmir sapphires remain legendary, though largely unavailable in modern mining supply, reinforcing scarcity at the extreme high end. When an unheated sapphire from a respected origin is accompanied by laboratory confirmation, it enters a premium bracket defined by credibility rather than trend. This credibility influences liquidity. Collectors between 35 and 65 often prioritize assets that combine beauty with clear documentation. An unheated sapphire supported by a reputable gemological report simplifies evaluation. It reduces uncertainty. It enhances resale confidence. It transforms color into documented authenticity. Market behavior supports this distinction. Auction houses consistently highlight unheated status in headline descriptions. Premiums over heated equivalents can be substantial, particularly for stones above 3 carats with strong, evenly distributed color. There is also a structural advantage to sapphire as a category. Corundum ranks high in hardness, second only to diamond. This durability supports long-term wearability, which indirectly influences market perception. A stone that resists abrasion maintains appearance across generations. In luxury goods, longevity reinforces value. But the deeper positioning of unheated sapphire in 2026 lies in psychology. As disclosure standards tighten and buyers become increasingly informed, stones that require fewer explanations gain traction. An unheated sapphire from Sri Lanka or Myanmar carries a simple narrative: natural formation, respected origin, laboratory confirmation. No reinterpretation required. In contrast to volatile categories driven by limited discoveries or dramatic color phenomena, sapphire represents structural continuity. It has been relevant for centuries. It is unlikely to lose relevance abruptly. The question worth considering is this: does geological perfection without human enhancement create stronger long-term confidence than stones shaped by post-mining intervention? Markets often answer that question quietly, through premiums. Unheated sapphire does not rely on scarcity alone. It relies on integrity, on origin, on documentation that confirms both. And in mature markets, integrity frequently commands more than spectacle. In first place, ruby, the stone that does not ask for permission. Some gemstones require explanation. Some require education. Some require laboratory reports before conviction forms. Ruby requires none of these. It has never asked the market for validation. For over 1,000 years, ruby has occupied the apex of colored gemstones, not because of marketing cycles, but because of psychological gravity. Red is not a passive color. It signals power, urgency, vitality. In human perception, red dominates attention before analysis begins. Ruby's authority begins before logic enters the room. But in 2026, prestige alone is not enough. Positioning depends on structure. Fine rubies from Myanmar, historically from the Mogok region, remain the benchmark for what collectors describe as pigeon blood red. Saturated, vibrant, internally alive. Production from these deposits is limited, politically complex, and irregular. Stones of exceptional clarity and size are rare at a level that borders on geological anomaly. Mozambique, particularly since the early 21st century, introduced a new chapter. High-quality rubies from Mozambique brought strong saturation, improved availability, and greater market accessibility. Over time, fine Mozambique material has proven capable of competing at auction with historic Burmese stones, especially when accompanied by laboratory confirmation of minimal treatment. And that word, treatment, defines the modern ruby hierarchy. Heat treatment is common in the ruby trade. It enhances clarity and color. It is accepted. But fine stones with no evidence of heating or with minimal enhancement command significant premiums. When origin, color saturation, clarity, and treatment transparency align, the result is not incremental pricing. It is categorical elevation. Ruby's position at number 1 is not based on novelty, it is based on liquidity. Across Asia, the United States, and the Middle East, ruby is recognized without explanation. It translates culturally. It maintains desirability across generations. When markets fluctuate, assets that retain cross-border recognition tend to preserve value more consistently than those dependent on regional trends. Auction performance reinforces this pattern. Over decades, headline results in colored gemstones frequently involve exceptional rubies. The market ceiling for ruby remains among the highest in the colored stone world. That ceiling influences the entire category beneath it. But beyond auction metrics lies something deeper. Ruby occupies a psychological category few stones can reach. It symbolizes permanence under pressure. Formed under extreme heat within corundum-bearing metamorphic environments, ruby is structurally resilient. Its hardness and durability make it not only symbolic of strength, but physically resistant to wear across generations. It does not fade from memory. It does not require rediscovery. It does not depend on trend cycles. In 2026, the most strategically positioned segment includes fine saturation without overly dark tone, strong fluorescence contributing to visual vitality, minimal treatment, clearly documented, Burmese origin at the highest tier, Mozambique at strong value positioning. Here is the deeper question worth reflecting on. When assessing long-term gemstone positioning, does rarity matter more than recognition? Or does recognition itself become a form of rarity? Ruby unites both. It is scarce at the top. It is globally recognized at every tier. It commands attention without explanation. Markets evolve. Preferences shift. New discoveries capture headlines. But when cycles mature, capital often returns to what feels fundamentally authoritative. Ruby does not compete. It presides. And in the hierarchy of colored gemstones entering 2026, authority still carries weight. Not every gemstone will behave the same in 2026. Some are tightening in supply, some are gaining premium through transparency, and some continue to dominate simply because the world already trusts them. Positioning is never about hype. It's about structure, origin, treatment, liquidity, and long-term recognition. Before you go, comment below. Which stone from this list do you believe holds the strongest long-term positioning, and why? That why matters more than the name itself. If you value structured gemstone analysis without speculation or noise, subscribe. The next episode will go even deeper into how market cycles reshape value. Because in gemstones, what lasts is rarely accidental. It's structural.